Please, please, please don't leave, Marcus begged, his hands trembling slightly as he clutched the woman's arm. Her face was pale, eyes wide with panic. It was clear she was running late. He could tell by the hurried way she checked her watch, but there was something about her, a certain desperation in her posture, that made him forget everything else. His heart pounded in his chest, anxiety flooding his veins. His job interview was only an hour away, but this woman was in trouble, and his gut told him he couldn't walk away. "I'm sorry," she gasped, twisting in his grip. "I need to go. I'm really late." I know. Just, please, let me help," Marcus urged, trying to steady her. "You need a ride or—" "I've called a cab already. I'm good," she snapped, but her tone softened when she met his eyes. She paused, scanning him for a moment before letting out a sharp exhale. "Look, I appreciate the offer, but you don't need to worry about me." He shook his head, stepping closer. She was stumbling now, teetering on her heels as she made her way down the cracked sidewalk. He couldn't let her go like this. "Hold on, just a second. Are you okay? You look—" He stopped himself. She was more than just late. She was panicked. She was in trouble, and the haze on the back of his neck was standing up. "I'm fine," she said, pulling away from him. But there was an unspoken plea in her voice. He didn't know her name yet, didn't know a thing about her life, but something inside of him told him that this moment was important, that he couldn't let this woman leave, not like this, not when she clearly needed help. But then, as if the universe had decided to laugh in his face, he heard it, the sound of a car door slamming behind him, a sharp, cutting sound that told him his time was running out. The woman turned, glancing over her shoulder. Then her eyes locked with his again. "I have to go. You really don't." The door to the car opened, and a tall, imposing figure stepped out, sharply dressed and clearly in control. Marcus could tell just by looking at him that this was someone who had power. The man looked around briefly, then his gaze flicked to the woman. "Rachel," the man said, voice clipped, demanding. "We've got a meeting. Now." Rachel's face drained of all color. Yes, of course. "I'm sorry," she mumbled, her voice barely a whisper. Marcus felt his stomach drop. There was something about the way the man said her name, like she was his employee. Rachel backed away from Marcus, and before he could say another word, she turned and rushed toward the car. Her heels clicked against the sidewalk as she disappeared inside, and the man followed, slamming the door behind him. The car sped off without another word, leaving Marcus standing in the street, completely stunned. His interview. He was supposed to be at his interview right now, the one that could change everything for him. And there he stood, stuck in the street like some lost fool. The frustration hit him hard. It wasn't just a job. It wasn't even about his interview that was now completely ruined. It was the fact that, for a second, just a second, he thought he'd really done something right. That maybe helping this woman had meant something. But now he was back to square one. He reached for his phone, his fingers numb as he pulled up the interview details. 10 a.m. He checked the time. It was now 10:30. Gone. The opportunity, the one he'd been waiting for, gone. And all because of some random woman and a guy with a suit who might as well have been a shadow. Rachel. She had looked at him like she wanted to say something, but there was no time. And now it was too late. He stood there for a moment, letting it all sink in. Then, feeling the weight of his wasted chance settle heavily in his chest, he turned and began walking toward the bus stop, his steps slow and deliberate, as if moving in a dream. But in the back of his mind, a question lingered. Who was she? Why had she needed help in the first place? And what the hell just happened? 3 days earlier, Marcus stood in front of his bathroom mirror, hands shaking slightly as he adjusted his tie. He stayed at his reflection, taking a deep breath. His reflection stared back at him with a mixture of nervousness and determination. This was it. His chance to prove he was more than the kid from the wrong side of town. More than a stereotype. He'd been working hard to get here, fighting every obstacle that came his way. This interview, this was the culmination of every late night, every early morning, every sacrifice. He looked down at the suit he'd borrowed from his cousin, adjusting the collar one last time before straightening his posture. "You're gonna kill it," he muttered under his breath. His mother's voice echoed in his mind. Don't let anyone tell you you're less than. Marcus nodded at his reflection, as if to reassure himself. He was ready. His phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. He glanced down at the screen. It was a message from his best friend, Jamal. Yo, you ready for the interview? You got this. Just don't mess it up, bro. Marcus chuckled softly, responding with a quick thumbs-up emoji. Then, he grabbed his things, heading out the door and into the world. It wasn't the best neighborhood. It wasn't the worst, either. But it was easy to feel small when the city towered above you, when the sidewalks were cracked and the air smelled like pollution. He was used to it by now, but it didn't make it any easier to forget. As he walked toward the bus stop, he felt the weight of his situation. The pressure to prove he was worthy. The pressure to make something of himself. The bus ride felt longer than usual, and by the time he arrived downtown, his nerves were almost unbearable. He double-checked the address, ensuring he didn't mix up the street names. But nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. The sound of a car door slamming in the distance brought him back to the present. Marcus stood there, breath shallow, staring down at his phone screen. 10:30 a.m. His opportunity was slipping away, and with it, the future he had worked so hard for. But then, something inside of him, something he couldn't quite explain, shifted. Maybe it was that fleeting look Rachel had given him. Maybe it was the realization that, sometimes, you had to lose something to find what truly mattered. Either way, he had to make a choice, and it had nothing to do with the job interview. But what would that choice cost him? Marcus felt his phone vibrate in his pocket, breaking his trance. The screen lit up with an unfamiliar number. His interview, probably trying to reach him. He hesitated, the pulse of uncertainty gnawing at him. He looked down the street, but the car had already disappeared, and with it, the mystery of Rachel and the man in the suit. They were gone, just like that. He couldn't help but feel like he'd missed something. A moment. An opportunity that wasn't tied to the job, but to something else. His fingers hovered over the screen, and after a beat, he answered the call. Hello. Marcus. The voice on the other end was stern, almost disappointed. It's Rick from Henderson and Company. I've been trying to reach you. You missed your interview. The words hit like a punch to the gut. Marcus swallowed, trying to steady his breath, but the realization that he'd lost everything he'd worked for crashed down on him like a wave. I know. I'm so sorry, he said, his voice cracking slightly. Something came up. I didn't mean to. You should have called. Rick interrupted, his tone cold. We've got other candidates who were on time. I'm afraid the position's filled. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. His world tilted for a moment, and he leaned against the nearest lamppost, staring out at the empty street, the echoes of city traffic distant in his ears. Please, just give me another chance. I can. Sorry, Marcus, Rick cut him off. We've made our decision. Good luck with everything. The line clicked dead before Marcus could say another word. He stood there for a moment, the cold bite of reality sinking in. He'd missed his chance, his one shot at getting out of this dead-end life. Gone, just like that, for the sake of a stranger who had disappeared as quickly as she'd arrived. The sound of distant sirens in the background tugged at his thoughts, reminding him of the world around him. He wasn't in his small apartment, staring at the flickering screen of his TV. He was out here, in the real world. A world where people didn't have time for mistakes, and where he didn't have the luxury of letting things slide. But then his phone buzzed again. The same number. Marcus hesitated. He didn't want to pick it up, not after the way things had ended. But something, an odd, irrational curiosity, pushed him to answer. Hello. Marcus. Rick's voice came through, softer this time. Look, I know this is a bit sudden, but I've been talking with the team. We've decided to give you a second chance. There's been a change in plans, and we need someone to step in. You're still available, right? Marcus' heart leaped into his throat. Was this real? Was this some kind of test? Yes, he replied quickly. Absolutely. I'm available. Great. We'll need you here by noon. Can you do that? Yeah, of course. I'll be there. Marcus hung up, his head spinning. A second chance. He couldn't believe it. He looked up at the sky for a moment, the sunlight too bright, almost blinding in its clarity. But his phone buzzed again. It was a text message from Jamal. Yo, what's up with the interview? You good? Marcus stayed at the screen for a moment before typing back. Got another chance. I'm heading back. I'll explain later. He took a deep breath. This wasn't over. Not yet. The ride back to Henderson and Company felt like a blur. The city passed by in fragments. The same cracked sidewalks, the same weary faces. But it felt different now, like Marcus was living in two worlds at once. On one hand, he was hurtling toward an opportunity he couldn't afford to miss. On the other, he was still thinking about Rachel, still wondering what had really happened. Who she was, why she needed his help. The city was large. But in that moment, it felt small. Too small. His mind raced, flicking between his earlier frustration, the shock of the phone call, and the constant pull toward the image of Rachel's face, her eyes wide, desperate, and scared. What had been so urgent that she couldn't even tell him what was wrong? And then, as if a switch had flipped, he realized something. The car. The man in the suit. It wasn't just any random person. It couldn't have been. The gears in his mind started turning. That man. He looked like someone important. Someone with authority. Someone who wasn't used to hearing the word no. And Rachel. She hadn't been in control of the situation. That much was clear. What was she running from? The weight of his thoughts only grew heavier as the bus pulled up to his stop. At Henderson and Company, Marcus was ushered in by a secretary who led him through a maze of glass walls and plush offices. He barely noticed the pristine decor or the distant hum of conversations behind closed doors. His focus was razor-sharp, his heart still beating hard from the events of the last hour. Rick was waiting for him in a conference room, arms crossed, as if he'd been expecting him. There was no smile, no warmth, just a stiff, professional A. Sit down, Marcus, he said, motioning toward the seat across from him. We don't have much time. Marcus sat, straightening his posture and trying to ignore the pounding of his heart in his ears. So, Rick continued, his eyes scanning the papers in front of him. We had some reconsideration, but the job's still yours if you want it. We need someone who can think on their feet, who's ready to step in and handle things at a moment's notice. You understand? Marcus nodded, swallowing hard. Yes, absolutely. Rick's gaze softened just a fraction. Good. You'll need to prove it. We've got a new project, something big. We'll talk about the details after you're settled. For now, I need you to meet with a few people downstairs. Get up to speed. You can start today. Marcus blinked. Today? He hadn't expected it to be so immediate. But there was no time to question it. No time to doubt it. Sure, he said, standing quickly. I'll be ready. As he turned to leave the conference room, something made him pause. It wasn't the office, or even Rick's sharp demeanor. It was the sudden, unmistakable feeling that the woman he'd helped earlier was somehow tied to all of this. Rachel. She had to be. But how? The elevator doors closed with a soft ding, and Marcus was alone in the quiet of the descending cabin. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, trying to shake the discomfort in his chest. The job. He had a shot now, one he couldn't afford to mess up. But his mind kept circling back to Rachel, the way she'd looked at him before disappearing into that car. The vulnerability in her eyes. The urgency that had pulled him away from everything he thought he wanted. Focus, Marcus. You have a job to do. The elevator came to a smooth halt, and the doors opened with a quiet hiss. Marcus stepped out into the lobby, a small, sterile space with polished marble floors and sleek, modern furniture. He barely glanced around as he made his way past a few workers in suits who barely acknowledged his presence. A secretary sat behind a desk, answering calls and tapping away at a keyboard. When she saw Marcus approaching, she smiled politely and nodded toward a set of glass doors to the left. You were the new team, right? She asked, her voice light. Marcus gave a small nod. Yeah, I'm Marcus. I'm here to meet. Right through there, she interrupted, pointing to the doors. They are waiting for you. He thanked her and walked toward the doors, his pulse quickening. The air was thick with tension in this place. He wasn't sure if it was the opulence of the surroundings or the heavy expectations that pressed down on him, but it was hard to breathe. Inside, a group of 4 people were gathered around a conference table, their voices low as they sifted through papers. There was a woman in a sharp red dress, her face set in a permanent frown. A man in a gray suit who barely looked up when Marcus entered. A younger woman with curly hair who smiled faintly at him, then turned back to the pile of papers in front of her. And finally, a tall man who seemed to be in charge, sitting at the head of the table, his gaze fixed on Marcus the moment he entered. "Marcus," the man said, his voice warm but with an edge. "We're glad you could join us. I'm John, and this is the team." Marcus nodded, still unsure of the protocol here. He had never been in a setting like this before. This much power, this much expectation. But the man's gaze, firm yet not unkind, was enough to make Marcus stand a little straighter. "Take a seat," John said, pointing to an empty chair next to the woman in the red dress. "We're going to bring you up to speed on the project." Marcus did as he was told, his hands clammy as he placed them on the table. He could feel the pressure already. The weight of it was palpable. "The project we're working on is high profile," John continued. "We've got a major partnership with a tech firm, and the success of this deal is crucial. We need someone who can handle pressure, someone who can move fast. That's why we're bringing you on today." Marcus tried to keep his voice steady. "I'm ready. I can handle whatever you need me to." The woman in the red dress looked over at him, her lips curling into a small smile. "You better be. This is a big opportunity, Marcus. Don't let it slip." Before Marcus could respond, John stood and placed a set of papers in front of him. "Here's what you'll need to know to get started. The deal is moving fast, and there's a lot at stake. We need you on this from the moment you walk out of here. It's your responsibility now." He could feel the tension in the room, like they were all waiting for something, some kind of breakthrough. But Marcus had no idea what he was really walking into. The details in front of him made no sense. There was a name, a company, but no context. Just numbers, just lines of data. It was all too much for him to digest at once. The woman with curly hair leaned over and whispered, "Don't worry. It'll make sense once you start." The words didn't bring him much comfort. Suddenly, the phone on the table rang, cutting through the stillness of the room. John's eyes flicked to the phone, his brows knitting in irritation before he reached for the receiver. "Excuse me," he said shortly, picking up the call. The room fell into a heavy silence as Marcus sat there, trying to make sense of the pages in front of him. Something about the situation felt off, like there were pieces he wasn't seeing. But the stakes were too high to question anything right now. He couldn't afford to screw this up, not after everything. The phone call lasted only a couple of minutes, but when John set it back down, there was a noticeable shift in his demeanor. He looked at Marcus, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Listen," John said, his voice lower now, almost like a warning. "There's something you should know before we get too deep into this. You're not just stepping into a role here. We need someone who can handle sensitive information, and not everyone is cut out for this." Marcus' heart skipped a beat. He felt the weight of those words pressing down on him. What was he getting himself into? Before he could respond, John turned to the woman in red. "I need you to take Marcus downstairs. Show him the basics. He's got to hit the ground running." The woman nodded and stood up, walking briskly toward the door without waiting for Marcus. He stood up, his stomach twisting into knots, but he followed her without hesitation. As they walked down the hall, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pulled into something much bigger than he could handle. He glanced over at the woman. "So, what exactly is this project?" he asked, trying to sound casual. She didn't look at him as she walked. "It's not important yet. What's important is that you don't mess this up." Marcus frowned, his unease growing with every step. "Okay, but..." She stopped abruptly and turned to face him. Her sharp gaze locked onto his, cutting through him like a blade. "If you want to be here, if you want to make it, you'll keep your head down, do exactly as you're told, and don't ask questions. Understand?" Marcus swallowed hard, nodding quickly. "Understood." Her expression softened ever so slightly. "Good. Let's go." They continued down the hall, and the further they walked, the more Marcus felt the weight of his new reality pressing in. The doors, the windows, the sleek walls, it all seemed to close in around him as they reached a locked door at the end of the corridor. The woman unlocked it and ushered him inside. The room was dimly lit, a large monitor glowing on the wall. There were documents scattered across a table, and a secure laptop was open on the desk. "Here's where it all starts," the woman said, her tone almost flat. "Get familiar with the files. You'll need this for the meeting tomorrow." Marcus stepped inside, his hands still clammy, his thoughts racing. This wasn't the job he had imagined, not by a long shot. But this was it. This was his chance. And somewhere, deep down, he knew Rachel was part of it. Somehow, she was tangled up in all of this. But why? And what did it all mean for him? Marcus sat at the desk, the soft hum of the fluorescent lights overhead the only sound breaking the silence. The screen in front of him flickered slightly, its contents a jumble of documents and figures that meant little to him. The words blurred together, a mix of names, dates, and legal terms that seemed almost intentionally obscure. He glanced up at the woman, who stood by the door, watching him without saying a word. "Is there something I'm missing?" Marcus finally asked, breaking the silence. His voice felt small in the cavernous room. The woman didn't respond immediately. Instead, she crossed her arms and leaned against the doorframe, her expression unreadable. Her eyes scanned him, weighing him, as if she were deciding whether to answer or not. "I thought you wanted this job," she said, her voice low, but sharp. "I do," Marcus said quickly, pushing aside his frustration. I need to understand more. What exactly am I looking at here?" The woman's gaze softened, just a fraction. She pushed off the doorframe and stepped closer, her heels clicking against the floor. "The job isn't about understanding everything right away, Marcus. It's about reacting to what comes your way. We can't teach you how to think on your feet. You either have it or you don't. You'll get the details in time. Right now, you need to focus on what's in front of you." Marcus nodded, trying to ignore the uncomfortable tension that had settled in his chest. He was used to working hard, to fighting for every inch of success, but this felt different. This felt like he was stepping into a game he didn't know how to play. His mind kept drifting back to Rachel. The image of her face, the way she'd seemed so desperate when he tried to help. It was gnawing at him now, more than ever. She wasn't just someone he had helped on a whim. There was something about her, something that felt wrong. But what could he do? He had no idea where she was. And even if he did, she was probably long gone, wrapped up in whatever mess she was running from. "Marcus," the woman's voice cut through his thoughts, sharp and insistent. "Focus." He blinked, shaking his head slightly. "Right. Sorry. You'll need to memorize these details by tomorrow," she said, turning to point at the documents on the screen. "The team's expecting you to be ready, so get familiar with everything here." He didn't have time to question her further. He turned back to the screen, letting the words wash over him, his mind struggling to make sense of the chaos before him. The weight of the unknown pressed down on him, thick and suffocating. The project was far bigger than he had imagined. There were references to high-profile business deals, international partners, and encrypted files that hinted at something even more secretive, something hidden beneath the surface of the corporate world. His stomach churned as he read further. There were names that didn't seem to fit the pattern of the usual clients, people whose connections to the company were unclear, even on paper. They were involved in large-scale acquisitions, mergers, and, of all things, political lobbying. But the details were buried under layers of red tape. It wasn't just business. There was something personal, something darker. Marcus rubbed his eyes, trying to clear the fog from his brain. This wasn't what he had signed up for. The woman, who had stayed silent for most of the time, finally spoke again. "Get used to it, Marcus. There are things you'll never fully understand. Things you're not supposed to." His pulse quickened. "What do you mean? What kind of things?" She looked at him, her expression giving nothing away. "You'll find out soon enough. Just keep your head down. Do the work. Don't ask questions. And most importantly, don't trust anyone here." Her words lingered in the air long after she turned and left the room, leaving Marcus to wrestle with them. Don't trust anyone. Was she talking about the people here? Or was there something bigger going on? Something he wasn't seeing? But before he could spiral into his own thoughts, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it, surprised to see a message from Jamal. Yo, you at the office, right? You good? You've been quiet. Marcus hesitated before typing back, fingers shaky on the screen. Yeah, I'm fine. Just a lot to take in. It's different than I thought. Jamal's response was almost immediate. Different how? Marcus thought for a moment. How could he explain it without sounding paranoid or scared? I'm not sure yet. I don't think I fully understand what I'm doing here. Bro, you're there to work. Just do your thing. You can figure out the rest later. You got this. Marcus read the message twice, then set his phone down, trying to ignore the gnawing unease in his gut. He didn't know what he was walking into. But he did know this. He couldn't back out now. Not after everything he'd been through to get this far. As the days passed, Marcus dove deeper into the mountain of files they had given him. He spent his nights at his small apartment, reading over documents, trying to piece together the puzzle. But the more he read, the more questions he had. The names kept coming up, names that seemed to be connected to people in power. Politicians, CEOs, people who were known in the world of finance and business. But there were also smaller, more cryptic references, hints at a network that wasn't just corporate. It felt like there was something bigger going on behind the scenes. Marcus couldn't help but wonder if Rachel was somehow tied into all of this. Her desperate eyes haunted him. Maybe she wasn't just some random person he'd helped on a whim. Maybe she knew something. Maybe she had information he didn't even know he needed. But how could he find her? He had no way of knowing where she was, or who she was really connected to. The only thing he knew for sure was that he couldn't ignore the feeling in his gut. As Marcus went through another set of documents late one night, he found a file marked confidential in bold, red letters. It was buried deep within a larger folder labeled client accounts. His fingers hesitated over the mouse before he clicked it open. What he found sent a chill down his spine. There, listed in a neat row, were names he recognized, executives at the top of the food chain in industries that spanned everything from technology to real estate. But at the bottom of the list, in small, italicized text, was a name he didn't expect to see. Rachel Martin. Marcus froze, staring at the screen in disbelief. Rachel, the woman he'd helped. The woman who had been in such a rush that he'd missed his interview. The file was sparse, but the fact that her name was connected to everything he'd been reading, that was enough. This wasn't just some chance encounter. She was involved in something bigger. What had she gotten herself into? And why had she needed his help so desperately? Marcus sat back in his chair, his mind racing. Everything was changing. And now, he was in deeper than ever. The click of Marcus's phone, lying face down on the desk, cut through the silence like a gunshot. He jumped, the jarring sound yanking him out of the trance he'd been in. His hand shot out instinctively, reaching for it as if he could stop time. But it was too late. He'd already seen it. The message. You need to stop looking into this. Trust me. It was from an unknown number. Marcus stayed at the screen, the message burning a hole in his mind. His heart hammered in his chest, the words feeling like they were meant to warn him, but he wasn't sure from whom or what. Who would know he was digging into Rachel? Who even had his number? His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Should he respond? Was it a trap? Another piece of the puzzle he didn't understand. He wasn't sure, but something inside of him stirred. The mystery was too deep. The connections between Rachel and this company, this project, whatever it was, had become far too real for him to just walk away. A soft knock at the door made him jump. Marcus. The voice belonged to the woman in red, the one who had been guiding him through the chaos of the company. We need to talk. Marcus quickly locked his phone and slid it into his pocket, trying to collect himself. He wasn't sure what was coming next, but he knew it wasn't going to be good. Not if she was he. Not with the way she looked at him, almost like he was a problem that needed to be solved. He opened the door, and she stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Her heels clicked across the floor as she walked into the room, her sharp gaze taking in everything in one swift sweep. I didn't expect you to find that file, she said without preamble. She didn't even look at him as she spoke, her fingers tracing the edge of the desk instead. You've been digging, haven't you? Marcus stood frozen for a moment, his chest tightening. She was on to him. How much did she know? How much had he missed? I wasn't trying to. I know you weren't, she interrupted, finally meeting his gaze. But you've crossed a line. You're digging into things that don't concern you. Marcus swallowed hard. Rachel's name. It's on that file. She's involved in all of this. Her expression hardened, her jaw tightening as if trying to contain something violent. You need to let this go. Now. Why? The question escaped before he could stop it, his voice sharp with the frustration that had been building inside him since he'd seen Rachel's name. Why are you so intent on keeping me from finding out what's going on? Who's she working for? What does this all mean? The woman's eyes flicked to the door, then back to him, calculating. She stepped closer, her voice lowering. You don't want to know what you're asking about, Marcus. Trust me, you went over your head. His pulse raced. You're not answering my questions. I don't have to. Just do your job. Focus on what you came here for. Forget Rachel. Forget everything else. Her words sliced through him like a warning, but something inside him refused to let it go. There was too much at stake now. He couldn't just back away. Not when the truth was so close. What happens if I don't? Marcus's voice was calm now, his breath steady despite the storm brewing inside of him. She studied him, a hint of something dark flickering in her gaze. You'll regret it. Before Marcus could respond, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving him alone with his thoughts. The next morning, Marcus walked into the office with a quiet resolve. The woman in red had warned him, but her words hadn't been enough to stop him. If anything, they had pushed him further into the darkness. There was something he needed to know about Rachel, and he was willing to risk everything to uncover it. He couldn't shake the feeling that the woman, his mysterious mentor, was hiding something. She was too guarded, too protective of the secret world behind these walls. And the more Marcus tried to dig, the more he realized that he wasn't just another new hire. He was being used, just like the others. But for what? As he sat down at his desk, he noticed a file that hadn't been there the night before. It was a thin folder, plain and unassuming, but the name on the front caught his attention. Rachel Martin, personal history. His breath caught in his throat. This was it. The piece he'd been waiting for. The answers. The key to everything that had been haunting him since the day they crossed paths. He picked up the folder, his hands trembling slightly, and opened it. The first page was a basic summary, just a list of facts and dates. Rachel Martin, born and raised in Boston, worked in marketing for a variety of firms. Then, something strange caught his eye, an unexplained gap in her employment history. That gap stretched from 2016 to 2019. What had happened during those years? The next page had more, much more. There were lists of phone numbers, addresses, and dates, but it wasn't just a list of her personal details. It was clear now that someone had been tracking her, monitoring her every move. But who? As Marcus flipped through the folder, his hands shaking, one page slipped out from between the others. It was a handwritten note, scratched on a piece of plain white paper. It read, "She's a liability. If she knows too much, we need to take care of it." The word felt like a punch to the gut. He could hardly breathe as he read it over and over again. Who would write this about someone like Rachel? Why would anyone want to hurt her? And who exactly was they? The noise of footsteps approaching the door made him snap the folder shut. He looked up quickly, heart racing. It was the woman in red again. "I told you to stop," she said quietly, her gaze cold. She walked into the room, shutting the door behind her. Marcus stood up, his voice low and steady. "You can't stop me. Not this time. I need to know who Rachel is. I need to know what's really going on here." The woman stepped closer, her eyes hard as stone. "You have no idea what you're asking for." "I don't care anymore," Marcus said, his voice stronger now. "Tell me what you know about Rachel. Tell me why you're hiding the truth." Her eyes flicked to the folder in his hand, and for a moment, it was like time stopped. Her expression shifted, just for a second, but it was enough for Marcus to catch the fear in her eyes. "I can't," she whispered, almost pleading. "You're going to get us both killed." The words hit him like a brick. "Killed? Marcus took a step back, his mind spinning. This was bigger than he'd thought. And it wasn't just Rachel's life on the line. It was his, too. The room felt suffocating. Marcus stood there, frozen, the weight of her words pressing down on him. Killed. The word echoed in his head, making it hard to think, to breathe. He looked at the woman in red, her expression conflicted, as if she was caught between some invisible force and a choice she couldn't escape. I don't understand, Marcus said, his voice hoarse. What are you talking about? Who's going to kill us? She took a step back, her eyes darting around the room, as if trying to find a way out. I can't tell you that. It's too dangerous. You have no idea what you're involved in now. Marcus clenched his fists at his sides, his heart pounding. Then help me understand. What's going on? Why was Rachel's name in that file? Why does everyone here act like I'm supposed to ignore everything? Her lips tightened into a thin line. She clearly didn't want to answer, but something in her eyes betrayed her hesitation. She seemed torn, like she was on the verge of telling him everything, but something was holding her back. Rachel, she's more than just someone working for the company, the woman finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. She's involved in something that could bring this whole place down. Marcus stepped closer, urgency coursing through him. What could bring this place down? What's she involved in? The woman's face shifted, the hardness in her expression softening just enough to show a trace of fear. I can't tell you. I'm sorry. You're asking questions you're not ready for. You need to stop now, Marcus. You're too deep already. Too deep. Marcus repeated, shaking his head. I'm just trying to understand. Trying to make sense of everything that's happening. She took another step back, the tension in her shoulders obvious. You think you want to understand, but trust me, you don't. You're about to become part of something you can't control, and you'll regret it. For the first time, Marcus saw the cracks in her professional mask, the fear, the desperation. She wasn't just a cold, untouchable figure in the office. She was scared, and she was afraid for him. Look, I'm already in this, Marcus said, his voice firm despite the uncertainty gnawing at him. You're not going to talk me out of it. I need to know what I'm dealing with. If Rachel is in danger, I can't just walk away from that. She exhaled sharply, as if the weight of the conversation had just broken her resolve. She ran a hand through her hair, her eyes flicking to the door as if checking to see if anyone was listening. You don't know who you're dealing with, she said, her voice barely audible. Rachel, she's connected to something bigger than you could possibly imagine. There are people who'll do anything to protect this secret, and they won't hesitate to eliminate anyone who stands in their way, especially you, Marcus. He felt a cold shiver run down his spine, but he didn't back down. He couldn't. The mystery surrounding Rachel, the strange way the company operated, it was all too much to ignore now. Who are they? Marcus asked, his voice low but insistent. The woman looked like she was about to say something, but the sudden sound of footsteps outside the door made her freeze. Her eyes widened with panic, and before Marcus could react, she rushed to the door and opened it a crack, peering out. Get out of here! Now, she hissed, glancing back at him with a final, warning look. Don't talk to anyone about Rachel. Don't ask any more questions. Just do your job. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, the urgency in her tone ringing in his ears. But before he could say another word, she slammed the door behind her, leaving him standing alone in the cold, silent room. He took a few steps back, trying to process what had just happened. His mind was racing, the puzzle pieces falling into place. And yet, the more he understood, the less sense it all made. Something dark was happening here, something dangerous, and Rachel was at the center of it. But why? What role did she play? And why was the company so intent on keeping it all hidden? He had to know the answers, and the only way he could find them was to keep going, to keep digging, even if it meant risking everything. The next day, Marcus arrived at work earlier than usual. The office felt quieter, almost emptier than before. People moved around with a new sense of urgency, whispers bouncing off the sleek walls, the hum of activity now tinged with a palpable sense of tension. He tried to ignore the feeling crawling up his spine as he made his way to his desk, trying to act normal. But it wasn't normal. Not anymore. The file. The cryptic message on his phone. The warning from the woman in red. Everything had shifted. Just as he sat down, his phone buzzed again. This time, the message was different. The unknown number had returned. Meet me at the old warehouse on 7th and Maple. Come alone. Marcus's fingers hesitated over the screen, a flood of questions rushing to his mind. Was this a trap? Was someone trying to scare him off? Or was this his only chance to get answers? His stomach twisted with uncertainty, but something deep inside told him he had to go. If he could meet whoever was behind these messages, if he could confront them, he might finally get the truth. But there was no telling who or what he was walking into. The drive to the warehouse was tense, the familiar streets of the city slowly giving way to darker, less traveled areas. As he turned onto Maple Street, the air seemed to shift, darker, colder, heavier. The warehouse stood at the end of the block, an old, abandoned building with boarded-up windows and peeling paint. Marcus parked a few yards away, taking a deep breath. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. But there was no turning back now. He stepped out of the car, his heart hammering in his chest. The night air was still, the only sounds the distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves. As he walked toward the warehouse, every step seemed to echo in the silence. He reached the door, which was slightly ajar, and pushed it open. Inside, the dim light from a single overhead bulb flickered, casting long shadows against the walls. There was a table in the middle of the room, but no one was sitting at it. The place smelled of dust and decay, the air thick with an eerie sense of abandonment. Marcus, a voice called from the shadows. Marcus froze. He turned, his breath catching in his throat as the figure stepped into the light. It was Rachel, but this wasn't the woman he had helped a few days ago. This was someone different. Cold, calculating, and she wasn't alone. Marcus's heart thudded painfully in his chest. The figure in front of him wasn't the Rachel he had helped. This woman, standing there in the dim light of the warehouse, her expression unreadable, looked like a stranger. The vulnerability he'd seen before, the fear in her eyes, had been replaced by a cold resolve. Rachel. Marcus's voice came out in a half-whisper, disbelief pouring through him. What's going on? Why are you here? Why didn't you? She held up a hand, cutting him off. Her movements were precise, controlled, almost mechanical. Don't talk, she said in a voice that was low but steady, as if every word was weighed with care. I need you to listen. Now. Marcus stood frozen, his mind racing. The whole world around him seemed to slow, but the reality of the situation was too heavy, too pressing. This was the woman he'd tried to help, a woman whose name had been buried in files, whose fate was tangled up in something far bigger than he could comprehend. Now, she was here, in front of him, and the danger that had felt so distant before now pressed in on him like a vice. You're not the woman I thought you were, Marcus said, taking a step back. What is this? What do you want from me? Rachel's eyes hardened, her posture straightening as she looked at him with a mixture of frustration and something darker. She didn't speak immediately, letting the silence stretch between them like a thick fog. I never wanted this for you, she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. You were just supposed to stay out of it. But now that you've seen too much, it's too late. Marcus felt his stomach drop at her words. Seen too much. His pulse quickened. What are you talking about? What is all of this? She looked away briefly, her eyes flicking to the shadows behind her as if searching for something, or someone. Then, with a visible effort, she turned back to him, her gaze piercing through him. Look, she said, voice now firm. I didn't come here to explain myself. I came here because I need you to understand the gravity of the situation. You don't get to ask questions anymore. Not if you want to stay alive. The words hit him like a slap, cold and jarring. Stay alive. He felt the air grow colder, the weight of her words settling over him like a dark cloud. Stay alive. Marcus repeated, struggling to make sense of it all. What are you talking about, Rachel? Who are you really? Who's pulling the strings here? What the hell is going on? Rachel's lips tightened, and for a moment, Marcus saw a flicker of something, guilt, perhaps, or fear, in her eyes. But it was gone almost as quickly as it appeared. She turned away, pacing for a moment before stopping abruptly. "They're watching us," she said, her voice low and urgent. "They've been watching me. Watching you. I didn't want this for you, Marcus, but now you're tangled up in it." "Who's watching us?" Marcus demanded, his voice rising with frustration. "What do you want from me, Rachel?" "Everything you think you know is a lie," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I'm not who you think I am. This company, Henderson and Company, they're not what they appear to be. And neither am I." Marcus felt the chill of realization creeping up his spine. Henderson and Company, the very place he had just started working at. The company he thought would be his ticket out of this mess. It was all connected. But to what? "I'm trying to help you," Rachel continued, her voice almost pleading now. "But you need to listen to me. There are things in motion that no one can stop. If you stay in this, if you keep digging, you'll be the next target. It's bigger than you, Marcus. It's bigger than anything you've ever imagined." Marcus stood there, his mind spinning. Every word she said only made the web more tangled, more impossible to navigate. The questions flooded his mind, but none of the answers seemed to fit. Who was pulling the strings here? Who was behind everything? Rachel, the company, the files, the threats. "I don't believe you," he said, his voice shaking with a mix of disbelief and rising anger. "You're just trying to scare me." Rachel looked at him, her expression hardening once more. "Then you'll find out the hard way." Just as the words left her mouth, the sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse, and a shadow appeared in the doorway. Another figure emerged, this one taller, his posture confident, his eyes hidden beneath the brim of a dark hat. Marcus stiffened, instinctively taking a step back. The air in the room seemed to thicken with an ominous energy. Rachel's eyes flicked to the new arrival, and for a brief moment, fear flashed across her face. "Rachel," the figure spoke, his voice low and commanding. "We need to move. Now." Rachel swallowed hard, her gaze flicking between Marcus and the figure. She took a step back, clearly caught in a moment of indecision. Then, without warning, she turned to Marcus one last time. "This is your chance, Marcus," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "You can leave now. You can walk out that door and forget everything you've seen. You can live." Marcus opened his mouth to respond, to ask more questions, but before he could, the figure stepped forward, his gaze locking onto him. "You don't get to ask questions anymore," the man said coldly. "You're in this now, and you'll stay in it, whether you like it or not." A sharp, metallic noise rang through the air, something heavy being set down, and Marcus's eyes flicked to the table where he had been standing earlier. He saw a small black object placed on the table, a gun. The man's eyes never left him. "You'll make your choice soon enough, Marcus. But trust me when I say this, you're in over your head." The tension in the air thickened, and Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. Every instinct told him to run, to leave, to escape before whatever this was enveloped him completely. But Rachel's desperate eyes, her warnings, kept him rooted to the spot. He was in too deep now. Rachel took a step toward the man, her expression hardening once more, the brief moment of vulnerability gone. "We're not done here, Marcus. Not yet. But if you want out, now's your chance." Marcus's mind raced. What was he supposed to do? Was this a trap? Was Rachel truly trying to protect him? Or was she part of whatever dark force controlled the company? The man's voice broke through his thoughts. "You have 5 seconds. Decide." The world around Marcus felt like it was closing in, and for the first time, he truly understood what Rachel had meant when she said he wasn't ready for this. This was bigger than him. But could he walk away? 5. His heart pounded louder. 4. The gun on the table gleamed in the dim light. 3. Everything in his gut screamed at him to leave. 2. The footsteps outside grew louder, closer. 1. He had no choice. "Marcus," Rachel said, her voice tight with something that felt like regret. "You need to trust me." The countdown hit 0, and the silence that followed felt like an eternity. Marcus's eyes flicked between Rachel and the man standing in the doorway, his mind racing. The weight of the gun on the table, the tension in the air, it was all too much. He wasn't ready for this. No one was. Rachel took a step toward him, her eyes pleading now, desperate in a way that made Marcus's heart twist. Please, Marcus, you don't understand the danger you're in. I'm trying to protect you. But the words rang hollow in his mind. Everything about this situation screamed danger, and yet Rachel was standing here, just as lost, just as trapped as he felt. And the man, his face still hidden under the brim of his hat, was a clear threat. The gun sat on the table like an invitation, a symbol of control, power, and desperation. Marcus swallowed hard, his throat dry. His breath was shallow, his hands shaking, and for a moment he thought his legs might give out from under him. This wasn't the life he had imagined. This wasn't the future he'd dreamed about when he first walked into Henderson and Company a week ago. The man stepped forward, his shadow stretching long and dark in the dim light of the warehouse. His voice was cold, detached. You don't have time for this, Marcus. We don't have time for this. You think you're in control, but you're not. This whole situation is bigger than you. Marcus's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, doubts, and questions. What did the man mean by bigger? Was Rachel really trying to protect him, or was she part of the reason everything was falling apart? The man continued, his tone sharpening. You'll get one chance to walk away. After that, there's no going back. Make your choice. 1,000 questions flooded Marcus's mind. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, to make sense of everything. But the truth was, there was no making sense of any of this. All he had were fragmented pieces, a puzzle that refused to fit together. The man turned toward the gun on the table, his hand hovering over it like a predator sizing up its prey. You want to walk away? Fine. But if you do, you'll be out of this for good. Rachel will be left to deal with it alone. Marcus's breath hitched. The thought of Rachel alone in this world, caught in the middle of whatever twisted game was unfolding, sent a wave of dread crashing over him. Was he supposed to leave her behind? Rachel's voice broke through the tension. Don't let him manipulate you. You have to trust me, Marcus. You don't know what they'll do if you leave. I'm trying to help you, but I can't do it alone. The man chuckled darkly. She's only telling you half the story, Marcus. She's in this up to her neck, and so are you. The moment you walked into Henderson and Company, you became part of this. You can't just walk away. Marcus's mind screamed to run, but his feet stayed rooted to the floor. He couldn't leave. Not now. Not when the stakes were this high. Why? Marcus found himself asking, his voice barely more than a whisper. Why me? Why is this happening? Rachel closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering the strength to say something she didn't want to. When she opened them again, they were full of a quiet, resigned pain. Because you're the only one who can help fix this. The only one who can get us out of this mess. Marcus shook his head. I don't even know what this mess is. Rachel stepped closer, her voice trembling. I didn't want you to get involved. I thought I could keep you safe. But it's too late now. I know too much, and so do you. You don't have a choice anymore. You're in this. The man's voice cut through the air again. The real question, Marcus, is whether you're willing to do what it takes to survive. Because you won't get another chance. Marcus felt his legs go weak, his body tense with fear and confusion. He had no idea who he could trust, no idea what was really going on. But something inside him, something deep in his gut, told him he couldn't just walk away. You need to make a choice, the man said, moving closer, his voice now a quiet, deadly promise. You're either with us or against us. Marcus's eyes flicked back to Rachel, her face a mix of fear and determination. He could feel her anxiety radiating through the room. She was terrified, but she was still holding on to something. Was it hope, or was it guilt? He wasn't sure. But what he did know was that he had already made his choice. He had stepped into this world, whether he liked it or not. The only way out was through. Marcus turned to the man, his voice steady despite the torrent of emotions crashing inside him. What do I need to do? The man's lips curled into a slight smile, and for a moment, It was as though the tension in the room lifted, just a fraction. Good choice. You'll regret it. But for now, you're on our side. Rachel's eyes locked with Marcus's, a flash of something, relief, maybe, passing through them. But just as quickly, her expression darkened again. Don't say I didn't warn you, she whispered, her voice full of regret. The man nodded toward the table. Take the gun. Marcus hesitated for a moment, his mind racing. But when he looked at Rachel, something in her eyes pushed him forward. She was in this deep, and now he was too. He reached out and grabbed the gun from the table. The man clapped his hands together. Let's get to work. The next few days were a blur. Marcus found himself pulled deeper into the underworld of Henderson and Company, a place where deals were made in the shadows, where nothing was what it seemed, and where trust was a luxury no one could afford. He was learning quickly, but every new piece of information only made the puzzle more complicated. He met with people who had names that didn't appear in the public records, people who move in the same circles as the most powerful figures in the country. He sat in dark rooms with too many people to count, listening to whispered conversations about mergers and acquisitions, about political influence, about power that stretched far beyond the walls of the company. And all the while, Rachel stayed close. She was there, watching, guiding him, warning him. But the more he learned, the more questions he had. The deeper he went, the less he understood. She kept saying things like, "You'll find out soon enough," but it was never enough. Never enough to satisfy his growing need for answers. There were moments when Marcus would catch her staring at him, her gaze distant, lost in thoughts of something, someone he couldn't grasp. And in those moments, he could see the truth in her eyes. They were both trapped. But for how long? One night, as Marcus sat alone in the dimly lit office, reviewing yet another set of encrypted files, the door creaked open. Rachel stepped inside, her face pale, her eyes shadowed. She didn't speak, but the look she gave him was enough. He stood up, every nerve in his body on alert. "Something's happened," she said softly, her voice tight. "They know we're on to them. It's time to move. Now." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, the lights flickered overhead, plunging them into darkness. The sudden darkness swallowed the room whole. Marcus's pulse quickened, his instincts kicking into overdrive. He couldn't see a thing, only the faint outline of Rachel standing just a few feet away. He heard her move, the sound of her shoes scraping against the floor, sharp and quick. Then came the sound of the door slamming shut behind her. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers brushing over the cold, glass screen. The light from the device illuminated his hands as he quickly turned on the flashlight, his breath shallow as he tried to steady his nerves. "Rachel." His voice came out strained, cutting through the thick silence. "What's going on? Why are the lights out?" But there was no response. The weight of the stillness was suffocating. He took a few steps forward, the flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. Every creak of the floorboard, every tiny noise, made him freeze. Something felt off. Something was wrong. "Rachel," he called again, louder this time, his voice a mix of confusion and fear. He heard a soft scuffle near the far corner of the room. His flashlight swung in that direction, the beam flickering slightly before landing on her face. But this time, her expression was different. Her lips were tight, her eyes wide with something far darker than he had ever seen in them before. Before he could speak, Rachel held up a hand to silence him. She moved closer, her movement swift, but there was a tension in the air now, something palpable, something dangerous. "You need to get out of here," she whispered, her voice low, almost strained. "Now." Marcus frowned, his mind racing. "What's going on? Why did they cut the lights? What's happening, Rachel?" She grabbed his arm, her grip tight, her eyes searching his face as if weighing something heavy in her mind. "It's not safe. They are here. They know you're here." Marcus's stomach twisted in an instant. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. "Who?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, as if saying it louder might make it real. "Who knows? Who's coming?" Rachel's gaze flicked to the door, then to the windows, her eyes darting around the room as if she was calculating every possible escape. I don't know, but I think they've been tracking us. You've been too involved now. They've been watching you. Watching both of us. His throat went dry. The walls felt like they were closing in around him. But how did they know? How did they find out? Rachel didn't answer. Instead, she pulled him toward the back of the office, guiding him through the shadows. Her movements were quick, but there was a hesitation, a desperation in the way she looked over her shoulder, as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. Move, she urged, her voice sharp, urging him faster. We have to go now. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest as he followed her. The darkened hallway stretched out before them, and the air felt heavier with each step they took. He could barely make out the outlines of the furniture, the quiet hum of distant machinery. The silence between them was suffocating, like there was no space left for questions. There was only one thing left to do: survive. Rachel paused just in front of the back exit, her hand on the doorknob. She turned to him, her eyes wide with something. Fear? Maybe, but also a warning. This is your last chance, she said, her voice hoarse. If you leave now, it's over. You can walk away, pretend you never saw any of this. They'll let you go. But if you stay. Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. Marcus's mind reeled with the implications. He had come this far. He had seen things he could never unsee. He had stepped into a world so deep and dark he couldn't fathom it. But now, standing there in the dim light, with Rachel at his side, he knew there was no turning back. I can't walk away, he said, his voice thick with determination. Not now. Not after everything. Rachel's gaze softened, just for a second, and for the first time in days, she seemed almost human. But then her face hardened again, the steel returning to her eyes. Then you're with me. You in this, Marcus. She pulled the door open, revealing the narrow, dim-lit alleyway behind the building. Let's go. Before Marcus could respond, they both heard it. Footsteps, heavy and quick, approaching from the end of the hallway. Rachel's face turned pale, and in that moment, Marcus knew the decision had been made. There was no going back. Run, Rachel hissed, her voice sharp. Now! Without thinking, Marcus followed her. They sprinted down the narrow alley, the sound of footsteps growing closer, faster. The chill of the night air stung his skin, but there was no time to feel it. He couldn't afford to look back. They reached the end of the alley, and Rachel grabbed his arm again, pulling him toward a nearby car. It was an old, inconspicuous sedan, parked in the shadows. She yanked open the door, throwing herself inside, and Marcus followed suit, slamming the door shut behind him. Drive, she said, her voice now more frantic, more desperate. Go. Marcus didn't need to be told twice. His hands were shaking as he gripped the steering wheel, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror. He had no idea who was chasing them. He didn't know what was happening. All he knew was that everything had changed. He was in too deep now to walk away. And Rachel, for all her warnings, had dragged him into this world. He wasn't going to let her go through it alone. As the car sped off into the night, the distant sounds of pursuit echoed in the background. They were being hunted. They weren't safe yet, but they were alive. For now, the drive felt like hours, though it was only minutes. Rachel sat in the passenger seat, her hands gripping the edge of the dashboard, her body stiff with tension. The road ahead was dark, and the only sound was the hum of the engine, the tires crunching against the asphalt. You have to tell me what's going on, Marcus said, his voice hoarse from the adrenaline coursing through him. Who are they? Why are they after us? Rachel remained silent for a long moment, her eyes focused on the road ahead. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, almost resigned. They are part of the network, she said, her words clipped. The ones pulling the strings behind everything. They've been running this show for years, manipulating everyone. Me, you, the people in that office. They've got power that goes beyond anything you can imagine. Marcus's mind spun. The network. Who was she talking about? What show? He wanted to ask more questions, to get more answers, but Rachel's face was like stone. She wasn't going to tell him everything. Not yet. We're not safe, she added, her voice low. We never will be. They'll come for us. But we can't stop. Not now. We just have to keep moving. Marcus felt the weight of her words settle in his chest. So what do we do now? Rachel's gaze hardened, and for the first time, he saw the real resolve in her eyes. We find out who they are. We take them down. Her voice was filled with something that sounded like a promise. But Marcus knew it was more than that. It was a threat, a promise to himself, and to him, that the game had just begun. The night swallowed them whole as Marcus sped down the deserted highway, the road ahead stretching out like an endless void. The only thing that kept him grounded was Rachel's steady, almost mechanical presence beside him. She wasn't just guiding him through the city streets anymore. She was guiding him through the murky depths of a world he had never known, a world that, until recently, had been far from his reality. Rachel's words echoed in his mind. We take them down. But how? He was just a guy who had wanted to land a simple job, get out of his small apartment, and move on from the life he'd been dealt. But now he was in the middle of something dark and complicated, where the lines between right and wrong were blurred, and the consequences of every move felt dangerously high. Rachel's voice cut through his thoughts. We're heading to a safe house. It's the only place we'll be able to lay low for a while. Marcus turned his head slightly, glancing at her. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of focus, but he could see the exhaustion in her eyes. Her shoulders were tense, her fingers digging into the seat as if holding on to whatever control she still had. How do we know they won't find us there? Marcus asked, his grip tightening on the wheel. How do we know we're not just walking into another trap? Rachel's gaze didn't waver from the dark road ahead. I'll make sure we're not followed. But you need to understand something, Marcus. We're running out of time. Every moment we waste puts us in more danger. The words sent a shiver down his spine. The urgency in her tone was chilling, as though she knew something he didn't, something that made him feel like every decision, every movement, was a thread in a game that was already being played without his knowledge. He nodded, his mind still spinning. So, what's the plan? How do we take them down? Who are we even up against? Rachel's eyes flickered to him, and for a moment there was a glimmer of something, a trace of the woman he had met when he first helped her. But it was gone almost immediately, replaced by the cold determination he'd seen so many times before. I don't have all the answers yet, she said, her voice softening just a fraction. But I know who's pulling the strings. I know who's responsible for everything. Marcus's curiosity deepened. Who? Rachel's jaw tightened, her eyes hardening once more. The people behind Henderson and Company. They are not just a business. They are a front, a cover for something much, much bigger. Marcus's chest tightened. His head was spinning with 1,000 questions. But before he could ask more, Rachel raised a hand, signaling for him to focus. Look, we don't have time to talk about this right now, she said quickly. Just drive. Keep your head on a swivel. I'll explain everything when we get there. Marcus gritted his teeth and pressed the accelerator, the car lurching forward. The miles stretched out in front of them like an endless void, and as they drove deeper into the night, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. They drove in silence for a while, the only sounds being the hum of the engine and the occasional flicker of the headlights. The longer they stayed on the road, the more the weight of their situation sank in. There was no going back. They were in this together now, whether either of them liked it or not. As the miles passed, Marcus felt a sense of unease settle in his gut. He glanced at the rearview mirror. Nothing, but the feeling wouldn't go away. I don't trust this, he said, his voice tight with anxiety. I don't trust them. I don't trust you. Rachel didn't flinch, but there was a shift in her expression, a flicker of something that could have been hurt or frustration, but she quickly masked it with a hard look. I told you, Marcus. I'm trying to protect you. You're in this deeper than you think. If you want to get out of this alive, you need to trust me. Her words, though spoken in a calm tone, felt like a challenge. He was caught between wanting to believe her and knowing that trusting her might be the worst mistake of his life. The car swerved slightly as Marcus's grip tightened on the wheel, the tension rising between them. He wasn't sure what to believe in anymore. The Rachel he had met just a few days ago, The one who had looked at him with desperation in her eyes had slowly morphed into someone else, someone who seemed just as deep in this mess as the people she claimed they were running from. "How do you know so much about all of this?" Marcus asked, the suspicion in his voice clear. "What do you have to do with Henderson and Company? Why are you so involved?" Rachel exhaled sharply, but her voice remained steady. "I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't ask to get wrapped up in this world. But I got too close. I learned too much. Now they are coming for me, and for anyone who knows the truth." Marcus's heart rate picked up. "The truth? What truth?" "The truth about what's really going on inside that company," Rachel said, her voice darkening. "It's not just business, Marcus. It's politics, money, influence, power that goes all the way to the top." She was quiet for a moment, her eyes flicking back to the rearview mirror. "It's about control. They want control over everything. And if I have to bane it all down to stop them, I will." The words hung in the air, heavy with implications. Marcus felt a cold chill spread through him. Burn it all down. She wasn't talking about a corporate takedown anymore. This was personal, the kind of stakes that had the power to change everything. But for who? For them? Or for the people at the top, the ones pulling the strings? And if he stayed with her, if he kept trusting her, was he really fighting for the right cause? Before he could ask another question, Rachel's voice cut through the tension. "There's a turn coming up. Take it and drive fast. They are closer than we think." Marcus didn't hesitate. He swerved the car onto a side road, the tires screeching against the pavement as he pushed the gas pedal down harder. The headlights illuminated the curve ahead, and he realized that they were getting deeper into the unknown. The safe house Rachel had promised him was still miles away. But with each passing second, the danger felt closer. The sounds of pursuit, faint at first, grew louder. The unmistakable sound of tires on asphalt. Their time was running out, and Marcus had no idea who to trust. But it was clear. There was no turning back now. The car barreled down the darkened road, the headlights cutting through the night like a knife. Marcus's grip on the wheel tightened with every passing second, the hairs on the back of his neck standing up as the unmistakable sound of a car's engine grew louder behind them. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, but he couldn't see anything through the darkness, just the faint outlines of trees and the road stretching out endlessly ahead. Rachel was tense beside him, her gaze fixed on the road ahead, her hand gripping the edge of the seat as if she were ready to jump out at any moment. There was no more conversation now, no more plans, just the urgent need to get to safety and the growing sense that it might already be too late. "Don't look back," Rachel whispered, her voice calm but laced with anxiety. "Just keep driving. We don't stop until we're safe." Marcus didn't respond. There was no time for words. His heart was pounding, the adrenaline coursing through his veins as he pushed the car faster, his foot pressing harder on the accelerator. He glanced in the mirror again. Nothing yet. But he could feel the pursuit, like a predator closing in. The road ahead was long and winding, trees on both sides stretching their branches toward the sky like dark sentinels. The only thing that kept him moving was the faint promise of safety that Rachel had given him. A place where they could regroup. A place where they could plan their next move. But as the seconds ticked by, he couldn't shake the feeling that the safe house wasn't going to be enough. Not with whoever was following them getting closer, not with the tangled web of lies and danger that they were already trapped in. The sound of a car engine revving behind them brought him back to the present. A faint outline of headlights appeared in the distance, gaining on them with frightening speed. The car was closing in fast. Too fast. "Rachel!" Marcus shouted, his voice tight with panic. "We're not going to outrun them. What do we do?" Rachel's eyes flicked to the side, her face set with determination. "Get ready to make a sharp turn up ahead. You need to lose them. Don't give them a chance to follow us." "Where?" Marcus asked, but Rachel didn't answer. Instead, she leaned forward, her eyes scanning the road ahead, looking for the right moment to make their move. The tension in the car was unbearable, and Marcus could hear the hum of the other car's engine growing louder. His knuckles were white from gripping the wheel too hard, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The sound of their pursuit's tires screeching against the pavement was a constant reminder that there was no room for error. Then, Rachel's voice broke through the chaos, her words sharp and urgent. Now! Marcus jerked the wheel to the right, taking the sharp turn at a high speed. The tires screeched as the car slid sideways for a moment, but Marcus quickly corrected it, the car lurching back onto the road. He barely managed to keep control, the car fishtailing for a moment before settling back onto its path. For a second, it seemed like they'd lost them. Marcus glanced in the rearview mirror and saw nothing but darkness. His chest was heaving with relief, the rush of adrenaline still making his heart race. But before he could even exhale fully, the headlights of the pursuing car reappeared, closer this time. They had followed the turn. Damn it, Marcus muttered under his breath. They are not giving up. Rachel was already reaching for the glove compartment. We need to slow them down. Get ready. She pulled out a small, black object, which she quickly loaded into her hand. A gun. Marcus's stomach dropped. What are you doing? Trust me, Rachel said, her voice steady. We don't have any other choice. Before Marcus could respond, she cracked the window open, aiming the gun out the side, and fired a single shot into the air. The loud crack echoed through the night, making Marcus flinch. But as soon as the shot rang out, the pursuing car's headlights flickered and swerved. They hesitated for a moment, as though the other driver wasn't sure whether to press forward or pull back. Marcus's eyes darted to the rearview mirror. He saw the car begin to slow, the figure inside clearly uncertain whether to continue the chase. It was a brief moment of hesitation, but in that moment, Marcus knew they had a chance. Go! Rachel urged, her voice harsh with command. Now's your chance. Take the next exit. Get off the main road. Marcus didn't need to be told twice. He veered off the road, making a sharp exit onto a smaller, less traveled path. The wheels of the car hit gravel, and the car jolted as it sped down the dirt road, the tires kicking up dust and stones behind them. They didn't look back this time. The trees on either side of the road blurred as they raced forward, the only sound the pounding of their hearts and the rush of wind in the night. They drove like they were running from a fire, from something that would consume them whole if they didn't keep moving. Minutes passed like hours. The dirt road finally gave way to a wider, more familiar path. They were still a few miles away from the safe house Rachel had mentioned, but Marcus could see the first signs of life ahead, a small cluster of lights in the distance. It was their destination. Safety, for now. He glanced at Rachel, who had fallen silent beside him, her face a mixture of relief and weariness. She wasn't relaxing. She wasn't done. Are we safe? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Rachel didn't answer right away. Her eyes were focused on the road, scanning the rearview mirror, constantly checking for any signs of movement. For now, she finally said, but they won't stop. Not until we're dead. Her words were heavy with finality. The weight of them settled in Marcus's chest like a stone. As they approached the small safe house, a low, decaying building that looked as though it had been abandoned for years, Marcus knew one thing for certain. There was no going back. Not now. Not when the threat had become too real. As he pulled into the driveway, he exhaled deeply, his mind racing with everything Rachel had told him. The truth was beginning to seep through the cracks of the lies. But how much of it could he trust? Rachel turned to him, her face darkened by the shadows of the car. This is where it gets dangerous, Marcus. We can't afford to trust anyone. We have to be ready for whatever comes next. And in that moment, Marcus realized something. He had been right to ask questions. But now, the answers weren't enough. Not anymore. The game had changed, and he was in deeper than ever before. The safe house was nothing like Marcus had imagined. He had expected a secure location, maybe a hidden bunker or fortified cabin in the woods. Instead, the building in front of him was an old, weather-beaten house, its paint peeling and the windows covered in grime. It had the kind of dilapidated charm that suggested it had been abandoned for years, yet something about it felt oddly alive. Rachel was already out of the car before Marcus had even parked, her movements quick, purposeful. She didn't look back as she made her way toward the door, pulling a set of keys from her pocket. Marcus followed, his feet heavy as he got out of the car. The adrenaline from the chase was beginning to wear off, but the gnawing uncertainty remained. They were here. But for how long? How long before the people chasing them found this place? He could feel it in his bones. Something was wrong. They couldn't stay here forever. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, narrow hallway. The air was stale, thick with the smell of mildew and dust. Rachel stepped inside first, her footsteps muffled against the old wooden floors. "Stay close," she called back to him, her voice low and urgent. Marcus hesitated for a second before following her inside, the door slamming shut behind him with a loud thud. He felt the weight of the world settle in his chest again, the silence inside the house amplifying every one of his thoughts. Rachel led him through the hallway, past a set of empty rooms, each one more forgotten and decayed than the last. But it was clear this wasn't just a hideout, it was something more. The house had been maintained, in some way. The floors were swept clean, the furniture covered in old sheets, the faint hum of electricity indicating the house wasn't entirely abandoned. They reached a small, dimly lit room at the back of the house. It had a makeshift desk cluttered with papers, a couple of old chairs, and a map of the city spread out on the wall. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows on the walls. Rachel turned to face him, her eyes hard but tired. "This is where we'll figure out our next move." Marcus looked around, taking in the room and its haphazard organization. "Next move? You said we needed to lay low." "We will," Rachel replied, her voice edged with frustration. "But this is bigger than just running. The people behind all of this, they won't stop just because we hide out. We need to hit back. We need to expose them." Marcus frowned. "How? We don't have enough information. We don't even know who they really are." Rachel's expression darkened, and she crossed the room to the desk, picking up a few files and tossing them onto the table in front of him. "I've been digging for months. I know who they are. Marcus. I know who's behind Henderson and Company, and I know why they're doing this." Marcus stepped forward, his heart pounding. "Then tell me. I'm not walking into this blind anymore." Rachel sighed, her shoulders sagging with the weight of what she was about to say. She met his eyes. The company isn't just a front for corporate power. It's a facade for something much darker. There's an underground network of influence, politicians, CEOs, tech moguls, and yes, even law enforcement, working together to control everything. Money, resources, information. It's all part of the plan. Marcus felt a cold chill sweep through him. This wasn't just about a shady company. This was global. It was powerful. And somehow, he had been pulled into it. "They've been tracking me for a long time," Rachel continued, her voice tight. "And they were tracking you the moment you got involved. You were just a pawn in their game, Marcus. But now," she hesitated, her expression flickering with a flash of vulnerability before it was masked again. "Now, you're a liability." Marcus took a step back, his head spinning. "A pawn? A liability? You've got to be kidding me. I didn't ask for any of this." Rachel snapped, slamming her hand down on the desk. "I didn't ask to be dragged into this mess. But I'm not going to sit back and let them destroy everything I've worked for. And I'm sure as hell not going to let them destroy you." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything that had come before. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. His thoughts were a whirlwind. He had thought his life was about to change with a simple job interview. He never expected this, never imagined he would be caught in the middle of something so sinister. "Where do we go from here?" he asked, his voice hoarse, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. Rachel stood up, walking over to the map on the wall. "We hit them where it hurts. We expose them to the world. But we have to be smart. If we do this wrong, we're both dead." Marcus nodded slowly, feeling the tension in his shoulders begin to build again. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. This was a war, and the people they were fighting weren't just dangerous. They were everywhere. The map on the wall caught his attention. It was littered with pins and lines, connections between names, places, dates, each one more tangled than the last. This wasn't just a business operation. It was a network of influence that stretched across industries, politics, even the media. "Who's behind this?" Marcus asked, his voice small in the room. "Who do we need to take down?" Rachel's eyes met his, a flicker of something dark in them. We go after the ones at the top. The ones pulling the strings. They are not untouchable, but we'll need help. And we can't do this alone. Marcus swallowed hard. I don't know if I'm ready for this. I don't know if I can do it. Rachel's expression softened slightly. I didn't ask you to be ready. I just need you to stand by me. You're already in this. The question is whether you're going to fight with me or against me. The weight of her words pressed down on him. He wasn't sure if he had the strength for this, but one thing was clear. There was no going back now. His life had changed forever. There was no escaping the chaos. But maybe, just maybe, there was a chance to make a difference. He took a deep breath. All right, I'm in. Rachel's lips curled into a thin, determined smile. Good. Now we wait for the right moment. And when it comes, we strike. The room fell silent again, but the sense of urgency lingered in the air like a storm waiting to break. Marcus didn't know what was coming next, but he knew one thing. He had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Not now. Not after everything they had learned. The war was just beginning. The quiet of the safe house settled over Marcus like a heavy fog, but his mind was anything but calm. Days passed in a blur of preparation, strategy, and nervous tension. The walls of the old house, once a place of refuge, had become a prison of sorts. Marcus had never been a soldier, never thought he'd be thrust into a war of shadows and secrets. But as each day wore on, he felt the stakes rising, the weight of their plan heavier with every passing second. Rachel remained the driving force, her determination unshaken. She worked tirelessly, pulling strings, reaching out to contacts in the shadows. She'd said they couldn't do it alone, but Marcus wasn't sure how much of her was left to give. The toll of their mission had stripped her of her former warmth, leaving only a sharp edge. But there were moments, fleeting moments, where Marcus could still see glimpses of the woman who had looked at him with desperation in her eyes, a woman trying to save herself, trying to save him. The day came when Rachel looked at him, the map spread out before them, and said, "It's time." The safe house wasn't safe anymore. Too many eyes were on them, too many unanswered questions. The people behind Henderson and Company had eyes everywhere. They had resources, connections that spanned the globe. But the truth, however hidden, had to come out. It was a careful dance they had been preparing for, one that demanded precision. But even as they put the final pieces together, Marcus felt the clock ticking, felt the walls closing in around them. He had become a part of this world, a world where nothing was as it seemed, where every face could be a mask hiding a deeper agenda. Every choice, every move, could be their last. Rachel stood in front of him that night, her eyes hard with resolve. "You ready?" Marcus met her gaze. He wasn't ready. Not in the way he wanted to be. He had never signed up for this. He had never chosen this life. But somewhere along the way, he had become part of something bigger than himself, something that was going to change everything. He nodded, taking a deep breath. "Let's do it." With that, they stepped out into the night, their mission set. The fight wasn't just against the people who had brought them into this mess. It wasn't just about taking down a corrupt company. It was about taking back control, their control. The fight for survival had become a fight for truth. They moved swiftly, slipping through the city streets, never staying in one place too long. They knew the people they were up against. They knew the stakes. But they also knew that, together, they had a chance. A small chance, but it was better than none. As they reached the final location, the one where the people behind it all would finally be exposed, Marcus felt a strange calm settle over him. It wasn't the calm of certainty, but of acceptance. He had made his choice. There was no turning back. Rachel moved next to him, her eyes scanning the surroundings, ready for whatever came next. "This is it," she said quietly. Marcus took a deep breath, looking at the door that would lead them to the answers they had been fighting for. He didn't know if they'd survive the night. He didn't know if they'd succeed. But in that moment, he understood. Sometimes, it wasn't about being ready. It was about doing what you had to do. The door swung open, and they stepped inside. The battle for the truth had begun. And as the lights dimmed and the chaos erupted around them, Marcus finally understood. The world they were fighting against wasn't just about power, wealth, or influence. It was about something far more dangerous, control over the truth itself. And in the end, the truth had a power all its own. It was a power that could break the world or change it forever.